Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
This is the Black Gold Banneret Podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Sharon and Eric Lopez.
And we welcome you to this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Eric Lopez here. Jeff on vacation, but joining us, he doesn't believe in vacations. Mr. Andrew Glukoff joining us here. Coming up later, Bryson Turner will join us. We got a lot to cover here. We're going to talk UCF football, some new additions to their future schedule. What does that mean? Where is the state of UCF football? Where's the state of UCF athletic teams in general as they enter now less than 365 days away from being in the Big 12? Where are they? What do they need to improve on? What are the big questions? And, of course, the Big 12 on the horizon. That's all coming up on this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. You can follow us wherever you are on the podcast, wherever you listen to, of course, on Twitter at UCF Banneret_SBN. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Black and Gold Banneret, where you'll have exclusive content there as well. All right, Drew, let's start with you. Here is Mr. Andrew Glukoff joining us here. Wednesday morning was significant because it was the first time we heard from the new Big 12 commissioner, Drew. All eyes were there as Big 12 Media Days going on. What was your thoughts there from the beginning there? Because I think that was the first time we've heard from the new commissioner since he was appointed, the new commish.
Well, you could tell he already has experience in how to use rhetoric, to gab, to speak, but not actually say anything of any really importance, which I think is actually a good thing. It shows that he's already kind of hitting the ground running, and that's encouraging because here, basically what he said was that the Big 12 is open for business. They're fielding calls. There's a lot of interest. This is stuff we already knew that. And it's, I don't want to say it's not, important, but the fact they're acknowledging it is important, that they're going to take their time. They're going to field those calls. They're going to take things seriously. Big 12 is acting out of a position of strength, which if you look at a year ago would be unheard of. Oklahoma and Texas announced they're leaving. Everyone's looking to jump ship. And now, a year later, the Big 12 is in a position of strength. I mean, this is an amazing turnaround. Comeback of the year right there. Maybe they should get a Banny for that. UCF helped make them have the comeback of the year. But I think it's there was a couple of nuggets in there that was very important. One thing that Brett said was about linear media, linear television being a vital part of going forward. So one of the things that we've speculated on, and we talk offline about all sorts of stuff, is where streaming falls into the media package going forward. Because as we know, streaming is the future eventually. The cord cutting continues. ESPN's even talked about making an a la carte setup for the primary ESPN channels. So, online streaming is the future. We know it, we acknowledge it. And if you disagree, I'm sorry. However, he made it very clear that the linear part is still the primary piece. And that's, your cable, your satellite, where ESPN, ESPN2 and U come into play. ABC, CBS, Fox, all those guys. So as we go forward towards that new media deal, tier 1 is going to be a linear channel. Tier 2 is going to be a linear, network of some sort. And then obviously tier 3 is going to be the catch-all that's going to be probably a streaming based service, a la an ESPN Plus, or maybe even like like a Paramount Plus, as they find a conference to kind of latch onto. They have the NFL, but nothing really fleshed out. So I think the fact that he said linear is primary gives us an expectation of what we're going to see in 2025 as far as our ability to see programs in action.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's part of the media deal. I mean, we're going to see with the Big Ten here shortly, and then Pac-12. I mean, we're going to see some big deals, I think, and linear still matters. Live linear content is still pretty important. Now, another thing that Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, said, he was asked about possibly losing members. He said, quote, "We are a very unified group. It was one of the things that drew me to the job, the alignment that the board and the AD community all have for going forward." Drew, your reaction to that? You buy that this Big 12 right now is unified as a league and was not at risk to be poached away from, say, the Pac-12 or whatever?
I do, but not for the reasons people think. And I've said this before online. This is the benefit of all being mid-tier schools that the Big Ten and the SEC didn't want. When the first two schools, Texas and Oklahoma, said they were leaving, everyone tried to jump ship, and the Pac-12 opted not to expand. The Big Ten didn't take a Kansas or an Iowa State, which would fit their academic profile. They didn't take them, so it proved nobody wanted them. So that actually allowed them to unify, because it's like, well, we're stuck with each other. Let's make the best of it. And they brought in 4 schools who wanted to be there and are willing to buy into that unity, because the Big Ten and the SEC aren't knocking on their doors either. So you have a bunch of mid-tier schools. You look at the power schools. There's definitely tiers in there. You could be a member of the SEC and not be a tier 1 school. You can be, Vanderbilt is not a top tier program. Arkansas is not a top tier. You're not going to have, if they weren't a member, you're not going to have the door knocked down for them to become a member. So that allows them to kind of work from that position of strength, like I said before. And I think his statement's very true. They are unified because nothing's changed. They're still mid-tier schools. Those 2 big conferences still aren't knocking on their door. And with the Pac-10/12, whatever they're going to call themselves in a couple of years, looking to add, potentially add members, what's the incentive of jumping from something that is stable? Because the Big 12 is stable now. That's the scary part. It's actually a stable conference with these 4 coming in, to go to the Pac-12, which is not stable. That's anything but stable right now. It's very volatile. They're like the Big 12 was last year. Top 2 programs pulled. Everyone's looking to potentially jump ship. And there's, people love Oregon. Oregon, from a financial standpoint, does not move the needle as much as people think. They're like the Oklahoma State because caliber of the Big 12.
Right, because if they did, which is what I've pointed out in previous podcasts, if they did, they'd be in the Big 10 by now.
And it's true. It's true. The only way at this point that things are going to change, because obviously once you start getting past 16, that number of dollars gets diluted. It's going to be really hard to continue that level of money payout per program, because you're asking a lot from your television partners at that point. You're another $100 million a year plus. I mean, that's a lot to pay for Oregon. Notre Dame, I get it. Notre Dame, they can command that, and they say, hey, you take Stanford with us. Okay, that'd be enough. But I don't see Oregon, being the team that is the program.
Are you buying John Wilmer, who was the first to report the USC UCLA departure? And then we're going to move on to UCF football items that we have to address. But he tweeted out that he's hearing, barring a panic move, a panic attack, that the Pac-12 10 schools are going to remain intact at least through this season, as far as no movement imminent. Are you buying that? Do you think that we'll just go through most of the season before we hear of the next move, whatever that is, by anybody?
I'm selling. And the reason why is the Pac-12 has gotten the ability to go forward with their television negotiations, and it's not an attractive product. There's an East Coast bias. Viewership is lower on the West Coast. That's just the way it is. East Coast people go to sleep. You get Pac-12 at night, which is great to watch for us who are awake at night and never sleep. But for normal people who actually do sleep at night, that they're not watching. So there's an East Coast bias there that hurts the West Coast schools as far as value. That's one reason why USC and UCLA jumped. They knew that. The conference packages were pretty self-explanatory by just looking at the sheer dollars that, the East side is going to make way more than the West side. So, they're going out to bid. They're starting their 30-day exclusive window. I don't expect them to get an attractive enough offer to really keep them all in there. And even though the Big 12's, hasn't started their negotiating window yet, they've still got a little bit of time. The networks can say, hey, this is kind of how we feel. They can give ballparks, and they all talk. So I think after that 30-day window is over and the Pac-12 doesn't get what they want, because I don't think they're going to, you're going to see the Arizona schools and maybe Colorado start looking, hey, maybe the grass is greener on the other side, to a conference that is more stable, has a better chance of viewership because you have teams in 3 time zones. There's value in that. And I think it's going to come back and help the conference as far as payout.
You think we might know before the end of the season?
At least before the end of the school year.
Okay.
As we know, June 30th was the cutoff in the Pac-12.
Right.
That's why USC and UCLA made sure that they got their announcement done before July 1st, because otherwise they would have had to wait till 2025 without paying some serious penalties. So they got the normal buyout at this point.
I agree with you for the record. I agree with you. I think that's, and I don't know. I don't know if John Wilmer meant the calendar year or he meant the football season, and so I'll give him some wiggle room.
I'm going to give him the school year, but I'm selling that they're going to be staying together long term. I don't think they make it past this into this new contract.
I agree. All right, we'll put realignment on the side for now, because you can only talk so much about it over and over. I want to get into a couple of news football items here, Drew. They've 2 games have been added to their future schedule, and I want you to break them down. We caught wind. Sam Houston, of all places, announced they're playing UCF at UCF. That was announced on Wednesday. We're recording this on Wednesday late afternoon. And this was after football schedule announced that New Hampshire is going to be playing UCF in the future. What year is that? Do you have the dates, Drew, for the...
I do.
Break it down for us.
Both games will be in 2024. So New Hampshire is going to be the season opener on August 31st. And Sam Houston, and here's the kicker, they're going to be on September 7th, which means the Liberty game is out, because as we know, Big 12 is going to have 9 conference games. There's only room for 3 out of conference. Now you got New Hampshire and Sam Houston at home. You have Florida away. Liberty is no longer on the 2024 schedule. They haven't announced what's going to happen to that game, but this makes a lot of sense. Liberty going from an independent to a conference member, they have to drop a lot of games and maybe push some games back. And with UCF's schedule after 2025, having 2 or 3 slots available every year is very accommodating for pushing the game back. If I was UCF, I would want the game pushed back. And I was talking to some Liberty fans online, and we were kind of going with the same idea of you don't want to cancel it if you don't have to, because they want to play. Their fans want to play UCF.
It's a big game for them.
It's a big game for them. It's good for UCF. You get that one and done home game, which you're going to see more of. Sam Houston, same conference now. They're going to be a new Conference USA member. That's an FBS game at that point. Same as Liberty. There's value in those, and you're going to see more of those buy games because UCF's going to have the cash to do it. And you make a few $1 million per home game. Pay $1 million. Liberty was supposed to make $1 million to play at UCF. UCF's going to make 2 to 3 net on it, and the numbers just speak for themselves. But it's also good for the fans. It's a tourist destination. You can make a vacation out of it. That's what UCF's marketing to other teams of, hey, come play in Orlando. You can also do this with your fans. Have them come to the parks and everything. SeaWorld, Disney, Universal, you name it. Making an event and play the football game. as well. Your fans will love it. And I think that's going to help. And I think that may be one reason why the Liberty game will stay on the schedule, but push back a number of years.
Well, and remember, Liberty's adjusting to going to be in CUSA, so they got to adjust their schedules too.
Oh, yeah.
So
they got a whole bunch of games they got to drop and move. I mean, they have a full schedule.
Yeah.
That, a lot of series and stuff. And I could see them keeping, in 2024, like Coastal Carolina, UMass, and UConn. While it doesn't sound great, those are all home and homes. And for them, there's value in the home and homes. You don't want to, you don't want to buy out if you don't have to. And, while Liberty does have a lot of dollars in their coffers, you want to try to kick the can as far down the road as possible, because you don't want to have to pay these out, these buyouts. If you don't, it's not good for the program. And if you remember, Eric, you and I were UCF students when, they converted from independent at the end of 2001 into a MAC member 2002, and they had to drop all sorts of games. Now it's worse now than it was back then as far as the number of games, but it's the same concept. They had to kick some down the road. They had to buy out of some others, but you try to push as many down the road as possible, because you don't want to have to pay that buyout. And, you schedule the games for a reason.
You look at the UCF schedule moving forward. Now, 2023 will be the first year UCF's in the Big 12. That'll be the 9 games that'll kick in. UCF, as of now, is scheduled to play at Boise State September 9th. At Boise, and they're scheduled to host Kent State on September 2nd. We expect that third game to be a home game in 23, correct? If there have been, 24, you got New Hampshire and Sam Houston, as Drew just brought up, at Florida. 2025, you've got FAU scheduled on September 13th, North Carolina scheduled on September 20th, and then a game at Maryland on August 30th. I think this is the recipe, don't you, Drew, in the new Big 12 for UCF? 2 home games, maybe 3 home games. Now, it's worth pointing out, in 2023, Terry Mahajer, told the media that UCF will have 4 home conference games, 5 road conference games. So as of now, in 2023, UCF will have 6 road games and likely 6 home games. Your thoughts on this? Because you've been outspoken about the future scheduling and how Danny White didn't do a very good job. I think Terry Mahajer and others would probably agree with you. I know some fans didn't. But where do you see now UCF as far as how do you see this future schedule working out with now the knowledge of the Big 12 going on a 9-game schedule?
Well, you're always going to try to schedule 2 home non-conference. That's always the benchmark. You're going to see it in 2024. So, 23, they got 4, 4, and 5. They're going to have 5 home games in the conference in 2024. So you're going to have 7 home games. So you're going to go between 6 and 7. 6 is the bottom, though. You'll never see UCF below 6 home games. That's always where you aim for. So the safest bet is to always have, 2 out-of-conference home games. And, Terry Mahajer said early on, in the short term, expect some matchups you're not going to really like. I mean, New Hampshire is not a matchup that you really think of. It's not. Say what you want. But Sam Houston's actually not a pushover program. They won the national championship at FCS a couple years ago. They're pretty good. That's actually a game I'm excited for, because if they stay that trajectory, they'll be a challenging school, at a lower level. And of course, you expect UCF to rise up, but it's still not going to be a pushover. UCF once upon a time was that scrappy school too. So you want a good quality opponent, because you're playing for not only just winning your conference, but you're in a power conference. You should be looking for winning beyond just your conference. Try to get into more. So you need good quality opponents for that. But I expect an FCS program to fill in that last slot for 2023. It may be in October. It may be somewhere in there, because you already got the front end of the season covered, that opening weekend against Kent State, which I'm thrilled about. That's my mother's alma mater, so I want to see UCF run them over. And going forward, you're going to see more of that 2-1, 2 homes, 1 away. Obviously, you've got in 27th, you got at North Carolina, you got home versus Maryland in 28. You got Florida home in 30, and at Florida in 2033. I know there was a lot of fans wondering if these schedule changes will affect Florida in 2024. I do not think so. Their conference, as of right now, the conference doesn't change membership until 2025, so nothing should change, for 2024 for Florida. That game should stay on the schedule. We'll see what 2030 and 2033 brings, which at that point becomes a home and home.
Yeah. I think this is the form, and this is why the South Florida doesn't make sense, right? Like,
well, there's no room when you think about it.
Yeah.
USF's schedule's full until 2028, so it's 26, which UCF currently is fully open, and 27, which already has one slot. USF's not available, so it's not like they can.
Right, but you don't have as much flexibility, and if you're UCF, if you're going to schedule a home and home, it's got to be something worthwhile, marquee game to some extent. And
you're going to get fans,
especially on years where the Big 12, where they have to play 5 road games in the Big 12, especially. I'm just saying.
Well, and that's where the value of playing in-state opponent comes into play, especially those years, because you look at any of the in-state schools, and Tallahassee being the furthest one away, they're all travelable. You go, you look at Boca Raton this coming year, it's 3 hours from Orlando, so you can make that drive. Miami's a little, just a little bit further down the road, to get to Miami Gardens where they play. You look at Tampa, which they're going to close the season is an hour and change. You just have to drive through the horrible highways in Tampa. It's
thank goodness we don't have to do that anymore. Holy.
Well, I always joked, and it works for both Tampa and Orlando. It takes an hour in Orlando to get to Orlando.
True.
But it works in Tampa too if you're driving 275 downtown.
Yeah,
that place
I've heard about it. Yeah. I heard about that. All right. One last thing before we let you go. We are now less than 50 days away from the start of the UCF football season. We are less than 365 days away from UCF being in the Big 12. And I don't want to dive into it too much, but give me your thoughts on the state of UCF football. Where do you think they are at? Are you feeling good about where they're at going into their final year in the American, and more specifically into the future of the Big 12? Or is there any concerns you have with the football program that needs to be addressed as they get into the Big 12? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't have any natural concerns. I mean, everything's kind of flowing in an incremental, here, then here, then here. I mean, it's not going to all magically come together overnight. UCF is still very much a transfer portal laden. I think that's going to change. They're going to get more and more players through high school recruiting, and once they make the step up. But I mean, the benefit of transfers now versus transfers a few years ago is with the portal, you get that free transfer. They don't have to sit out a year, and it could be a freshman that moves, that went to one school, didn't like it, decided to come to another. We saw that with Jaden Francois, never played at Nebraska, transferred to UCF before the season ever started. Now, Nebraska was petty and didn't let him out of his scholarship, so he couldn't play that year. But still, you still will see freshmen come over. Jordan Johnson, the wide receiver, he moved as after a freshman year to UCF. So you're going to still see some of that. It's going to plug holes. It's going to keep UCF competitive because the players know where UCF's status is. And while 2022, okay, you got one more year in the American, that recruiting's done. Now everything's for 2023 and beyond. So anything you see going forward is going to be towards that. Now, looking forward to this season, this is while you don't have a team as strong as Cincinnati in the conference this year, compared to last year, top to bottom, you look at the top half of this conference, it is a stronger conference than it was last year. So you're on an average level, you look at the top 6 teams, top 5 to 6 teams, they're going to be overall better on average than the conference was last year, where you were very top heavy with Cincinnati, and it just kind of went, there was Cincinnati way up here and then everyone else down here. So UCF is going to be challenged, and I think that's very important. In your swan song season, you don't want a cakewalk, because you're going to up the ante in 2023. Everything has a progression, and you want these players, especially ones that are going to play next year, to have that progression. It's part of the development process. They need that. You need them to be pushed. UCF is touting this as their strongest home out of conference schedule. And I kind of roll my eyes a little bit at that because Georgia Tech's not good.
You're not fired up for Jeff Collins and
Louisville is
state of
fair.
Atlanta.
So on paper, when you look at it from, we have 2 Power 5 teams coming into play, take that with a grain of salt. I'm actually looking more forward to the conference schedule. You have Cincinnati, you have SMU, you have Memphis, and all the teams UCF lost to in last year in conference. They have a chance for revenge. They have a chance, with SMU and Cincinnati, they have a chance for revenge at home. I mean, you don't have to tell these guys, hey, look what they did. They know. Anyone who's been there, they know. I mean, UCF in both games was completely outclassed. Right. And with the players that have come in and the chance to gel even more and build up depth, they're going to be out for blood. It's going to be revenge. It's kind of like what the Louisville game last year was for the Cardinals. That was a revenge game.
Yeah, I mean, Malik Cunningham will be back, by the way. So I think you look ahead, not to look ahead, but that second home game, we're going to learn a lot about the UCF linebackers in that game. Because remember, they had a rough performance at Louisville.
Well, it's a whole new squad now. Outside of Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, for the most part, I mean, you've got a lot of transfers that came in. Obviously, the other starters, Bryson Armstrong, he graduated, and I believe he's working for the football staff now. And, Tatum Bethune transferred. So, I mean, you have a whole new team really in the linebacking core for the most part that'll, have to handle.
Which we don't know. I think it's the biggest question, non-quarterback question. That's going to be the popular question is the quarterback position. But I think the linebacking position is this going to be a very significant question that probably most talked about after the quarterback position. I will say this real quick, and we got to go. It's important to try to compete for the conference title this year and get to New Year's Six, but it's also important to finalize who you have that's ready to go for next year in certain positions as well. And I'm curious, especially in the line of scrimmage, how they'll look, because when you get to the Big 12, that's going to be a bigger challenge. So you want to be sure you're ready for that. Otherwise, or at least know what holes you have that you may need to address in the transfer portal when you go to the Big 12.
Absolutely. And you already know the offensive line is going to be a problem.
Yep.
Very senior laden. So you have a lot of age there. So you're going to have to be looking at that second unit because you rotate guys out from time to time. You got to look at that second unit of players and see where you can patch or where you can develop. The UCF's patch, they brought in a couple of transfers that are going to probably end up starting. So that tells you something about the offensive line if you have to bring in players to start.
We have football just around the corner. Oh, it's getting close. I know Drew's got the dates circled. He's got the UCF schedule circled. He's got Baker Mayfield against Cleveland Browns season opener circled.
So does Baker.
Yeah, so does Baker. Drew, tell the audience where they can find you and argue with you.
Yeah, if you haven't blocked me already, you can find me on Twitter at StatBoyDrew. And, of course, you can always find my work on Black Gold Banneret.
Yeah, Drew's taking part on
this lovely podcast.
And the podcast, you'll be on here frequently. And, of course, he's been writing on the Bannies on that as well on blackandgoldbanneret.com. Drew, thank you for taking the time, sir.
Absolutely. Coming
up next, Bryson Turner will join me. We'll talk some news and notes. A UCF coach going to Ohio State? Is Drew to blame for that? I might blame him on that segment. Some UCF basketball scheduling news, and what are the state of the program for some of the other sports at UCF, plus some big ads in softball and baseball. That's all coming up when we return on this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.
Welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Eric Lopez here with you. Jeff Sharon on vacation. Joining me now, he's been our co-executive producer of this show, and of course, part of our staff, Mr. Bryson Turner, joining us now here. And Bryson, this is an important week for UCF baseball coming up on starting Sunday. And the reason I say that is because the MLB Draft will begin Sunday night. ESPN will televise it. There's a ton of rounds to go. It'll be about a 2-3 day event. And that is significant because this next week is going to really shape up how UCF baseball is going to look in 2023. So give us an idea what to look for here at the MLB Draft, because we have not only UCF players currently that could be drafted or could be in the mix, but obviously some recruits that could also be drafted that could impact, again, Greg Lovelady's roster.
Yeah, yes, indeed, Eric. So the top two people that are looking like a pretty sure thing to be drafted are Connor Stain, starting pitcher, and Alex Freeland, shortstop. Looking at the draft list, both of them are ranked at a point where I would say them being drafted looks like a good possibility. And so I would just keep an eye out for that. Alex Freeland's been tearing it up in the Cape Cod League, so I would say that the injury that he sustained late last season is dealt with. So I think we could definitely see him go. Other names that I'm recognizing from this year's team on the list that are people that are entered into the draft: Cameron Crane, pitcher; Kyle Kramer, another pitcher; John Montez, who's normally been a second baseman; Hunter Patterson, starting pitcher, but of course he was out for the season last season. He got a bad injury. Jeffrey Pena, Pablo Ruiz, William Saxton, and Riley Wash. Now, some of these players are already out of their collegiate eligibility anyway, which in the case of Wash and Saxton, but everybody else certainly has a chance of being drafted. I would say that of the names I mentioned that aren't Stain and Freeland, I would probably keep an eye on Jeffrey Pena, considering he was the team's best bat and he has some really good speed on him.
I would argue he's too, by the way, their best all-around player on the roster. He quietly, I didn't realize this until I wrote, and it's going to come out eventually. He's our nominee he's one of the nominees for UCF Male Athlete of the Year for the Banties. Bryson, he put up a heck of a year very quietly, was a clutch bat, great glove. To me, and tell me if you agree, I think Freeland and Stain are going to get drafted pretty high, and they're pretty much gone. They're not going to come back. Pena's fascinating to me. I'm really curious where he ends up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it'll be very interesting because Lovelady said after last season's American Athletic Conference baseball tournament that Pena was one of the people he thought could get drafted, and then he didn't. So I will be very intrigued to see if perhaps this season he will get drafted. But if he doesn't, he is a redshirt junior, if I'm not mistaken. And so that means that he still has another year of eligibility to use. And I mean, it definitely could help to have him in the outfield once again next year. So we'll see how that goes, but I would definitely keep an eye out for Pena and Freeland. And then other than that, I would say Pena is probably my next best bet. And then perhaps Hunter Patterson, because he certainly pitched very well. And I believe Tommy John surgery has not, prevented teams from drafting.
Well, look at last year, Colton Gordon. Colton Gordon got drafted still pretty high by the Astros, despite his season-ending injury last year at UCF. So I think Colton Gordon had more of a bigger body of work than Hunter. But remember, Hunter was drafted super high prior to committing to UCF as well. And to your point, I think, especially with such a big draft, teams may take a chance on an arm or not. So that would not surprise me one bit. And I do think if Hunter were to get drafted, I don't think he would return, because at that point it's like you got to get the money, at least in his case, especially if you're an arm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. With a long-term injury like he had, we'll see. I mean, the big question is going to be, is going to be depending on his collegiate sample size, because so far he doesn't actually have a lot of starting pitching experience in college. 2020, the season got cut short. 2021, he started the season in the starting rotation, then he fell out of the starting rotation, then he came back, and then this season got cut short due to injury. So I think it'll depend. I think really, if he doesn't get drafted, it's because teams haven't seen enough of him yet. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out on.
So we'll see what happens, but the MLB draft will get going. It'll be Sunday night. It'll be who do you think is the first player to get drafted? Do you think it's Stain or do you think it's Freeland? Give me a bold prediction here.
I would go Stain. The talent I think is there with him. Based on rankings, it's Stain, but I don't know. Maybe somebody's in need of a shortstop enough that they go Pena before Stain gets drafted. I'm not really sure. It just depends on what teams are looking for.
It is a 20-round draft. First 2 rounds will be Sunday night. Rounds 3 through 10 will be Monday, and then they'll wrap up the draft on Tuesday. Rounds 11 to 20. Round 1 and 2 will be on ESPN and MLB Network on Sunday. Monday and Tuesday, they're going to stream it on MLB.com, and we wish the best for the UCF guys, and we'll see how that kind of shakes out with the 2023 roster. That doesn't stop Greg Lovelady and the Knights, though, from adding to the roster for the 2023 season there, Mr. Bryson Turner, including a couple of key additions that might be some familiar with if you're a fan of college baseball in the state of Florida.
Yes. So there have been 2 transfers that have announced that they are coming to the baseball program. Actually 3, the one announced last night. There is Zach Chappelle, a left-handed pitcher from North Florida. Dominic Stagliano, a Stetson right-handed pitcher that's going to be coming. And then announcing last night on his Instagram, Corey Robinson. He is a former Florida Gator. He announced last night on his Instagram that he is going to be transferring to UCF. He is an outfielder. So, all right, as of right now, the one I am most intrigued about is Dominic Stagliano, because his appearances last season at Stetson, he went 53.1 innings, get 3.21 ERA and 55 strikeouts. He started 3 times, so he can start, but he's normally been a reliever. So I think regardless of which role he plays, I think that after having a season like that is a fairly solid transfer to bring into a team that could potentially lose 1, if not 2 starting pitchers. And then, of course, the third spot kind of left up in the limbo after David Litchfield fell out of the rotation. So basically, Lovelady really does need to build that rotation back up again, because even if Patterson isn't drafted, it's likely we're probably not going to see him next year potentially. So you basically have to build the rotation back up. We have Ben Vespi, you have Cameron Crane, but who knows what they're going to be like in the fall. So bringing in somebody like Stagliano, I think is a really good move there. As far as Robinson goes, the outfield, I think, is pretty packed for right now. Robinson is only spent his true freshman season with Florida, so he's a sophomore coming into this coming year. And even if Jeffrey Pena does get drafted, there's still the matter of John Rice Plumlee there and Jason Ambos. So he's definitely going to have to earn his keep if he wants to get some playing time. But again, that's even if Pena gets drafted. So I think this is going to be something that we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Well, but again, it's additions. You're adding depth, and you're adding people that could potentially help you going to the Big 12. Again, UCF less than 365 days away from going to the Big 12, Bryson, and the Big 12 in baseball is strong. It's even stronger to the American from that standpoint. So especially, we got to keep in mind that there's a very good high probability each day that passes without a movement there's a very good chance that when UCF's in the Big 12 next year, that Oklahoma and Texas will still be in the Big 12, at least for a year. And we just saw both of those programs get to Omaha in the College World Series. And I think depth and pitching talent will be a key for UCF, not just in this next year, in their final year in the American, can they stay healthy, but also to compete in the Big 12. They're coming off a 35-win season, finished second in the American regular season title, didn't make the NCAAs, had some losses, particularly in non-conference, that I think knocked them out of consideration for the NCAA. And the competition will get stronger next year. But I do think that the recruiting, because remember, people forget, in baseball and in softball, it takes a couple years before that coach starts bringing in his or her players to the program from a recruiting standpoint. We're starting to see that from Greg with baseball. So health, which we've discussed way too much at length on this show, so I don't want to get into that again. But health and depth for baseball is going to be a key next year in the American, and then moving forward to the Big 12, Bryson.
Oh yes, depth, the pitching and depth. Now, fielding depth, I think, has actually been very good. I think that on the field and with the bats, the depth has been actually quite good, especially when you have somebody like Andrew Sundin who broke out the way that he did. My worry is going to be with the pitching, because that has been this team's Achilles heel the past 2 seasons. They did not have enough starting pitching depth to put forth a good performance in the AAC championship game, which is what led to them losing to USF. And now this season with the pitching injuries that have been where they are, you don't necessarily have your best pitching talent going forward into the tournament, which means it was pretty much a toss-up, which is why they needed to go to extra innings in the first semifinal game against Houston, and then ultimately lost to the Cougars in the second game. So pitching seems to be this team's Achilles heel, pitching health and pitching depth. I really hope that they can improve on that going into next season, because this is something that's kind of plagued them a little bit now for a couple of seasons now. So I think this is definitely something that Coach Lovelady needs to address. And then I think that as long as the bats hold up, which they have been so far, then this team will be in a very good spot, because the bats have been carrying them for so long that it's unfortunate that they deserve better fortunes than what they've been getting, considering the seasons that Pena and Freeland and Sundin had, for instance.
With all that being said, I actually feel good about baseball going to the Big 12. Like, I feel, we had Drew on last segment. I feel good about football going to the Big 12 competing. I actually feel good about baseball because, Bryson, baseball from the American to the Big 12 is not as big of a jump compared to other sports. Like the American prior to this year I know was kind of a unique year for them. They were not as strong as past years, but they're usually a top 5 league in college baseball. Big 12 is a top 3 league. It's not as huge. So the competition's there. Even this past year, the American, even though they were down, quote unquote, East Carolina, who's been the top program in the league, they were a win away from the World Series. They were an 8 national seed. So I think baseball is accustomed to the competition in league play. So I actually like the talent, the rosters they put. It's the health is the biggest key. If Connor Stain and Hunter Patterson was healthy this year, this team would have probably been an NCAA tournament team, because they would have avoided some of the bad losses they had in the non-conference there. If Colton Gordon was healthy last year, I think they would have been an NCAA tournament team. They've been knocking on the door. And I think in baseball, as we've seen in baseball, there is a ton of parity, although it's becoming a sport in the South. So as we do our state of the programs real quick, I do like the shape of baseball. But you mentioned what needs to be addressed there, and I think that's a good way to end the baseball portion of the segment there. Let's move over to softball. Lots of news on softball. Comings and goings. Let's start with, where do you want me to start, Bryson? You want me to start with the comings or the goings?
Let's go ahead and start with the people that are coming in. Let's do some good news first before we have to deal with the bad news.
All right, so we got 3 additions, and 2 of them, one of them we already talked about in a previous podcast, but I'll throw her in there, and Sarah Willis. two-way player from Washington, transferred to UCF. That's official. Two other players that have been added. You have Jasmine Williams coming from Oregon, who's a former all-conference performer at Oregon, infielder. Great glove, was part of the U.S. 2019 team that won gold, that Coach Bear was part of the staff as an assistant. So she comes over there. And then UCF picks up a big bat last Friday, Bryson, from Minnesota.
Yes, indeed. They managed to bring in Chloe Evans, which is quite the addition for them. She, of course, was part of that Minnesota team that defeated the Knights in the aftermath of that of Shannon Doherty's walk-off home run in the opening night against Georgia. She, in that game, Evans went 1 for 2 and got on with a walk. So, but she ended up having a real solid season with Minnesota. And considering that she is coming now, in the aftermath of Denali Shophocker leaving, what position did she play in that game against UCF? Right field.
Yep.
So I think that more than likely this is the case of Ball Malone like reloading, because at least offensively, because offensively I think is similar to baseball. Offense is where this team has thrived last year, and so Coach Ball Malone wants to make sure that this team is firing on all cylinders again on offense, especially just in case they need it, in case the pitching staff doesn't exactly go the way that they wanted to. Now, with that said, we didn't expect Kama Woodall to do what she did last year, and look what happened with that. So I think that this is a very good sign in terms of the offense. I think now is really the question of, instead of having one Kama Woodall going in, now we have the potential of two Kama Woodalls, although and then of course there's also Caitlin Felton as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But I think it's similar to baseball, where the offense is looking really good, since a lot of people are going to be coming back and they're reloading, but the pitching still has a bit of unknowns to them, and that's something we're going to have to wait and see if Coach Ball Malone can maybe work or transfer magic.
Sounds familiar. Quick ad, Chloe Evans, I'll give you the stat. She was an all Big Ten performer, second team in the Big Ten. Hit 11 home runs last year, drove in 46 runs. The 11 home runs from, as you mentioned, she played right field. You know how many home runs UCF starting outfielders not named Jada Cody have hit the last 2 seasons combined?
How many?
7.
Oh, yeah, that's some power right there.
Chloe hit 11 in 1 year. So to your point, I think she'll be at right field, the outfield there. Big bat that really, I can't think in. It's been a long time since I can remember UCF having a power bat in the outfield. Jazz Williams is an infielder who knows Coach Ball Malone from the USA days. I expect she could be the Justine Molina replacement, particularly in second base. Could play shortstop as well. Coach Ball Malone likes versatility, so don't be surprised if you see, like, for example, Michaela Macaria, who also played second base in high school and travel ball, can play second as well. So look for some movement there. This might be the deepest infield UCF's had, because we're not even talking about the 25th ranked recruiting class that's coming in for this upcoming season.
Oh, yeah.
So there's going to be a ton of talent there.
I mean, what I'm really excited to see is what the aftermath is going to be, because with Gianna Mancha having now graduated, what does that mean for Jada Cody catching? Because she's basically been Gianna Mancha's personal catcher. So what happens now that she's gone? Does she go now play kind of third base much more often than she does? And then if that's the case, what happens to Kennedy Searcy? Does she go to play another position?
Well, but don't forget, Jada played left field some too. So even if she doesn't catch, who's to say she may play left field a little bit as well? That's the thing. Coach Ball Malone believes in versatility, so there's going to be a lot of options versatility-wise. And I think offensively they'll be fine. Pitching, as you mentioned, is going to be the question. Sarah Willis, I expect to be in the mix pitching-wise. She was a number 7 recruit coming out of high school in travel ball, talented arm, can throw 70. I expect her to be in the mix in the rotation with again, I mentioned this top 25 class. They have a top recruited pitcher, a couple of them, coming in to the staff, including one that is the daughter of Les Miles, former former LSU football coach and Oklahoma State football coach, by the way. On that, in fact, and then Caitlin Felton you mentioned, and so forth. So, and I don't think they're done yet in the portal. We'll see what happens there, but that's
Evans certainly came real quick after Willis and Williams were officially announced.
So I think that's the state with softball there. They're young. They're going to be young in the circle. I think that's one of the big questions, but I think there's a ton of excitement overall with the softball program. But of course, when you have success, Bryson, that means people want your people, correct? Especially coaching staffs. And a couple of news items. One that was first reported by Extra Inning Softballs, Justin McLeod. Whitney Jones apparently will be moving on to Ohio State to run the offense there for the Buckeyes. Whitney, of course, 1 year here at UCF if the reports are accurate, which I think they are. This is what happens, Bryson. It doesn't matter what conference you're in. If you win a lot, people want your people, right? And Big Ten, as we now know by now, you don't have to be a softball fan or anything. You now know that Big Ten schools have a lot of money. And so we wish Whitney the best there. We'll see what Coach Bear does and the coaching staff from that standpoint. But obviously, she was a very good impact there, but that's part of life. And then Wednesday, North Georgia announces that Aaliyah White will join the staff to be the pitching coach at North Georgia. That's a D2 school. They are 3.6 miles away from Aaliyah's house and her family's house. So it's a bit of a homecoming. She wasn't going to come back. She was a grad coach at UCF, so she finished being a grad student, moved back home to Georgia, and all of a sudden, North Georgia, Mike Davenport, who's one of the most successful Division II coaches, offered her the job, and now she's over at North Georgia. So you got Whitney Jones moving on to Ohio State, Aaliyah White, who you got to know, Bryson, now at North Georgia, adding to the Coach Bear tree.
Yes, indeed. I think that as far as Whitney Jones goes, it's basically as you said. When you're good, then other people are going to want to have you on their team. And I think that going from an assistant at UCF to an assistant at Ohio State, it seems to me that Whitney Jones is really looking to be a head coach at some point in the near future.
100%. I think that's a big motivation in this move. I'll give you this stat, Bryson. Jordan Clark, who she's taking over for, was the Ohio State assistant, just got hired at Florida Atlantic. In fact, I just interviewed Jordan Clark. You can listen to that cheap pub on In the Circle podcast that I host. Prior to Jordan Clark, Sharonda McDonald was the assistant there. She got hired to be the head coach at Campbell at the time. Now she's the new head coach at Michigan State. I probably would not be surprised if Ohio State used that to lure Whitney in, because you're 100% correct. Whitney Jones has been very open and public about the fact of her desire to be a head coach, and moving to Ohio State, in her opinion, believes that could get her to that next step.
Yeah. Yes. So I think she wants to advance her career, and there is no fault for that. The fact that you went one season at UCF and this offense became what it was, who wouldn't want to have a coach like that? The question really now is who is next? I imagine that this is that it'll be someone that Coach Bear will have ties to, maybe in some capacity. So I'm very interested to see who she picks, because this is, of course, last year was a complete staff turnover, which means that now she has to make another hitting coach hire. And I believe, if I remember right, she mentioned how nice it was to have someone like Whitney Jones kind of take over the offense while she can focus on the pitchers a little bit more. So I feel like that's something she wants to have again in the next hitting coach, right?
Potentially, but I also think she's versatile. And if she believes that the best assistant out there is, let's say, a pitching coach, I don't think she'll hesitate to flip. Because remember, prior to last year, Coach Bear ran the offense and did very well. So, and I kind of equate UCF to like the New England Patriots, where at the end of the day, coaches come and go, but it's Bill Belichick's staff. It's Bill Belichick's system. This is Coach Bear's system at UCF, and it's a matter of plugging she's gonna plug somebody in that believes in her philosophy. I agree with you. I think it'll be somebody that she has ties with, which that could be a big list. I'm not even gonna speculate on that. But it's gonna be somebody that fits the system, because that's what UCF is successful. It's the system in there, and we'll see what happens. I think it'll take a few weeks, but I'm intrigued to see what happens in that direction from the hire there. So those are the comings and goings for UCF. I think you and I, though, agree. You look at softball as far as the state of UCF softball, as they're, again, in a year, they're going to be in the Big 12. And what's fascinating here, Bryson, again, if Oklahoma and Texas are still in the Big 12 a year from now, which, again, each day that passes looks more and more likely, you could have a Big 12 next year that has Oklahoma, which is the dynasty program in college softball right now. They're going for a three-peat this year. Texas, those two played for the national title this year. UCF obviously had to run through Oklahoma, beat Texas. You have Oklahoma State in the league. That is a powerful conference that it will be easily the number 3 conference in college softball. And yet, I feel like UCF will hold its own in softball. This nucleus, especially offensively and even pitching, as young as it is this year, most of them will be ready to go for Big 12. And I think softball is in good shape from a softball standpoint, because they're used to playing a tough schedule out of conference. Coach Bear tested them. They had the 14th strongest non-conference schedule, which helped them host. So I think they will be able to adjust to the Big 12. But wow, you talk about a wow factor. Softball, Big 12 softball, Bryson's going to be loaded, just like baseball. I mean, Big 12 baseball and softball is going to be pretty remarkable.
I'm excited.
Yeah, we are indeed excited about that. When we come back, speaking of excitement, the UCF women's soccer schedule is out for this year. We'll analyze that, plus some reports about UCF basketball schedule out there, and we'll address concerns with the basketball programs going to the Big 12. How do we feel about soccer's and volleyball and their future? That's all coming up as we wrap up this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. We wrap it up. Eric Lopez, Bryson Turner with you here. Jeff Sharon on vacation this week. Let's get into some other sports. UCF basketball. Some scheduling news coming out recently. It's been now reported UCF will be playing in the Orange Bowl Classic. We fingers crossed. They'll be playing Missouri out of the SEC, Bryson. Of course, we all well documented the issues UCF's had with the Orange Bowl Classic, with cancellations, with Florida State the last couple of years, with COVID and stuff. Fingers crossed they'll be playing in Sunrise against Missouri. And then there's been a report on Twitter from Rocco Miller, who covers college basketball, that UCF and Miami will be playing a home-and-home schedule. Start with this year, Miami coming here, and then UCF going to Miami next year. Of course, UCF just played at Miami last year, and beat the Canes. But right now, what we know from the UCF schedule, based on reports, stuff that's already been out there, confirmed, and even what Johnny Dawkins said at the Charge On Tour event in the past, this is shaping up to be a nice, fun, non-conference schedule when you consider that UCF now potentially will have Miami and Florida State at home. Florida State, remember, will come here, which will be significant with the return of Darren Green as a Seminole. That'll have plenty of storylines, but you've got Miami coming in. I believe UCF, I think Johnny may have mentioned this. You were at the Charge On Tour, but he mentioned they might have a home-and-home set up with Ole Miss as well, or at least that's been reported. That is the future. I think they're going to be probably on the road for that one. We'll see. But you got Missouri there. One thing Johnny Dawkins has done a phenomenal job that he doesn't get a credit for is scheduling. And then remember, we're not even mentioning the fact UCF's going to be playing in the Bahamas in a tournament where they're going to be playing Oklahoma State. Johnny Dawkins is able to schedule games that, in my opinion, nobody else in that position as UCF head coach can pull off because of his stature in the sport. And to get FSU and Miami at home, if that's the case, again, the Miami thing has not been confirmed, but Florida State is. That That's a fun schedule, and I hope it's something that we'll see similar even when UCF goes to the Big 12, which we'll get into, will be a gauntlet. But as far as the non-conference here moving forward next year, I'm really fascinated by that, and I'm excited in that UCF's going to have low expectations. I saw John Rothstein in his American Conference rankings had UCF like 6th or 7th. I had 7th in his rankings. I actually am okay with that because one of the things that I think hurt last year's team, Bryson, is that the expectations were too high. People kind of overrated, in my opinion, the roster. And I actually think the roster now I think it's where we might see the opposite, where people are going to be so down on the roster that I think it could be underrated. But your thoughts on the schedule?
Well, let's look at last season. We have Michigan, FSU, Auburn, Oklahoma, Miami. That is five really good non-conference matchups that John Dawkins scheduled. One of them, of course, didn't get played, but hopefully that'll be made up for next season. And of course, now that he's gaining with all of these new ones, I think it seems to me that there's a good even mix between these Power 5 non-conference games, and then some of these games against mid-major programs to kind of help work out the kinks. So I think that Dawkins, like you said, Dawkins does a very good job kind of balancing it all out because he aside from Oklahoma and Auburn being back to back, he really spaces those games out really well. So for example, one thing I noticed is that had the FSU game been played, it would have been played a little less than 2 weeks before the Michigan game, which then you let have the North Alabama game, then work out the kinks, and then you have Michigan. Of course, they had a little bit of a longer rest between that, so it ended up working out well considering how good that Michigan game was. But yeah, Dawkins does a really good job doing that, and I'm not surprised to see him continue to do that now. As far as the roster goes, underestimated, I would definitely agree with you on that front because, first of all, though, I think it's really more underestimated in terms of the depth because starting lineup, I think is actually looks relatively good because let's look at the returners again. We have Darius Johnson, who is in the running for the men's freshman of the year banning. He's certainly been getting a lot of attention and throughout his freshman year. And I think that now with a lot of the players from last year's team gone, I think Darius Johnson will be able to really take over this team and really put forth that leadership that he kind of showcased last year. So I think now having that, he doesn't have any obstacles or any other competitive egos. At least there shouldn't be. So I think we'll be able to see more of him and in his environment. We also have Ty Freeman, who did very well in his 6-man role. And then, of course, we have CJ Walker, which was he was very well done as well in the forward spot. I would honestly say that this is one of those things where I think it's going to be a 50-50 shot, really, because the transfers that they have could work, but they also couldn't work because there's a lot of ifs and buts and all sorts of different things that have happened in each of these players' careers that could say, oh, they're due to be better, or oh, they're not really there yet. So I'll be interested to see how this season works out. But I think, especially of course with the Hendricks brothers coming, it'll be interesting to see how they'll be able to do right off the bat. But I think the biggest thing is that Darius Johnson should have complete leadership control on this team from a player perspective. And I think that if anything, this team is going to play much more meshed together as a unit than they did last year. And I think that'll be able to give them the chance in some games that they would have lost the year before.
John Rothstein. Here's what John Rothstein wrote on his site, College Hoops Today. He picked UCF 7th in the American. Here's his projected starting 5. Darius Johnson, as you mentioned. Brandon Suggs, who's the transfer from East Carolina. Ethiel Horton, who's the transfer from Pitt. CJ Walker, and then the youngster, Taylor Hendricks, part of the Hendricks brothers. That's the big recruits that Coach Dawkins has coming in. with his brother Tyler Hendricks also going to be on the team as well. You've got, the transfer from Utah and Tion, Michael Durr from Indiana, the transfer, big man who obviously used to be a former Bull. That's going to be weird. So, you got Tyam Freeman coming back. We'll see. There's a lot of intrigue there. We'll see what happens there, Seth. If you're wondering, John Rothstein, real quick, has Houston the favorites. No surprise there. Houston, I think, actually is a Final Four really good. They're going to be really good this year. They might be a national title pick by a lot of people, myself included on that. Memphis, obviously, we know the roller coaster that they are. He's got them picked second. Cincinnati's picked third. Wes Miller there in his second year at Cincinnati, kind of there. Temple is picked fourth. Tulane fifth. South Florida sixth. I don't know about that one. I would have UCF ahead of that one. But, this will be their final year in the American. And I think the big concern here, men's basketball, is what's coming. The Big 12, which has been the number one conference in college basketball, RPI-wise. You look at that league, the last two national champions, Bryson, have come out from the Big 12, Kansas and Baylor. And those schools in the Big 12 invest a ton of money in basketball, both men and women. And my concern with the men and the women here at UCF is the support financially. I mean, we're trying to just get financial support for football in general, and that's not been easy. How are you going to do that for basketball? That's going to be the biggest challenge. That's my biggest concern, is how are they going to compete, because the basketball is in a gauntlet. And I'm going to say this. I think Johnny Dawkins is the right guy for this job because he's been in the Power Five. He knows what he's about to get himself into. And as I mentioned earlier, he has the respect of college basketball, everybody, coaches, media. I just think he's the right guy for this job right now, but it's going to be a struggle. To me, the two sports they're going to struggle the most when they go to the Big 12 is the both basketball programs, because they're, especially the men, they are entering to an incredible, I cannot underestimate the strength of the Big 12 in basketball. It is incredible.
Well, I will say that I think that one, budget isn't everything, because if St. Peter's proves us anything, because if you have the right team, Eric, I think if you have the right team, the budget certainly is a bit less of an issue than you think it can be.
Here's the problem with that, because you and Jeff kind of think the same way there. St. Peter's had one good week in the MAC with 2 A's, won the conference tournament, and made a run to the tournament. That's a crapshoot. They're not in the Big 12 playing on a nightly basis, home and home against Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, who will probably be in the league next year, Oklahoma State, Baylor. Like, hello, that is a gauntlet. And I do think when it comes to playing in that league, finances, support, resources will matter. Whereas if you're in a smaller league, it's a lot easier. I mean, quite frankly, it's easier to get to the tournament. By the way, I don't think the smaller leagues are going to be in the tournament much longer with all the realignment. But yes, from a one-game scenario, you're right. Finances don't matter. But in the long haul, it does.
All right. Well, and my other thing is that I do think that Coach Jock Dawkins is currently, right now, I think actually has a very solid core built up and getting ready for the Big 12 in Darius Johnson and the Hendricks brothers. I think both the three of those players, with the potential of Jalen Young, a JUCO transfer, he develops well, I think could make for a very good core. And I think that is going to be I think seeing them perform, seeing this core thing, like those a lot of these transfers, I think, are mostly stopgaps for when he gets to the Big 12, because when you really look at it, there's the potential that there could be a big influx of new recruits when you go into the Big 12, whether it's with transfers or with incoming freshmen. So I think more than likely this season, you really want to keep an eye out on those younger players that have a couple more years of eligibility to them, and see, are they going to be a good core for when the team goes to the Big 12. Darius Johnson has certainly proved himself already. I think we just have to see if if he just maintains on the right track. I think this year the Hendricks brothers will certainly be people to watch for.
I agree 100%. I've said that for UCF in basketball, their key to the success to build the roster and make a push for the NCAA tournament every 2 to 4 years. You're not going to be an annual NCAA tournament team. The issue now is the transfer portal. Think about this roster if Darren Green stays here instead of going to Florida State, right? Like, think about a couple pieces you lose because of the portal. Harder to keep a group together in college basketball today, which is not, it's a college basketball fan. It's tough because I think it hurts the product. But you're right. That's the key to UCF success. You're not going to compete with the Baylors and the Kansases of the world when it comes to getting blue chippers on a year-to-year basis. But what you can do and can be successful is build a nucleus that can grow together and be a postseason team like we saw with BJ, Taco, and company. You add some pieces to that. The problem, I think, in the last year, I don't think the chemistry was great, and I think as a result, it just didn't fit. But I agree with you. I'm excited to see the young talent, and that's a big storyline into this season. And you're right, that's going to be the key. The good news about being in the Big 12, I've been negative about their chance in the Big 12. The good news about the Big 12, you can finish 7th in the Big 12 and make the NCAA tournament. You cannot finish 7th in the American and make the NCAA or the NIT. So you do have more wiggle room in basketball on the men's side as far as even if you don't do great in the league. If you finish 7th, you can make the tournament or make an NIT team, which I think should be the goal for this basketball program moving forward. Women's, there was a hire by Cynthia Messer that caught your eye to her staff. Real quick on that.
Yes, she completed her coaching staff with her final assistant coach, and also she's listed as the recruiting coordinator. Cynthia Messer managed to lure Michelle Edwards away from Rutgers after she's been with that program for 19 seasons, Eric. So I'm very interested to see what lured her here because Michelle Edwards has basically served a variety of roles within that Rutgers program for a long time now. And so now she's going to be coming here to UCF as an assistant. And looking back at her college days, she actually had quite the collegiate career at Iowa, where she was the first women's basketball player at Iowa to have her number retired in 1990. So yeah, 1990, and no Iowa number had been retired since until 2020. Just to show you how good of a player Michelle Edwards was back in her day. So I will say, like, now that we have a fuller picture of what her staff looks like, it is a very diverse and motley crew that we have here taking over this women's basketball program. You have Coach Messer, who has experience in the Big 12, so she knows what's coming. You have Tennille Adams, who of course played with Messer back in their days, and so they have their dynamic together. You have Greg Brown making his return, who of course knows the area. And now you have Michelle Edwards, who was a great women's basketball player in her day, and she's listed as the recruiting coordinator. So she's probably going to be the one on the recruiting trail. So I think this is a very good staff that she's made up. They have a very diverse skill set, and I think that's going to be very important. I think really the question looking forward is going to be, how do these new players gel together, because really we're basically having a full reset.
You're starting over. Here's the thing. You're starting over. This is all a wild card. It's the unknown. We don't know much about the staff. We don't know much of the players. This reminds me a lot of the Florida Marlins. I'm a Marlins fan. 1997, the Marlins won the World Series. Then they got rid of everybody. They had a fire sale. Wayne Huizinga, the owner, got rid of everybody because of finances, traded him away. The roster the following year was unrecognizable. Jim Leland came back because he wanted a paycheck, eventually got replaced by John Bowles. And the fans, got turned off by all that. And I think when you look at this situation, and we're seeing this, Bryson, we've had a lot of Banny Awards already out there on our site. We encourage you to check out blackandgoldbanneret.com. And thank you to everybody that has read and has posted and has voted and has sent feedback. We really appreciate that. We always appreciate your feedback. We're on pace for maybe a record-breaking month of July on the Banneret. Unbelievable turnout. And
yes, I'm very happy with how the voting, but
we still got more to come out. By the way, still got more.
Oh yes, we still have a few more categories that we need to get out. So please, check back on the blackandgoldbanneret.com for more articles that pop up and vote. Because if anything, your votes do have a voice, because because the fans count as one vote amongst one vote from each of us staffers, and if there's a tiebreaker, then the fan vote winner gets the award. They are the tiebreaker. So that's how important it is that you vote.
Well, and your voice can influence too. It's influenced some of my votes already. I can tell you that up front, behind the scenes. Bryson knows this. The fan vote has influenced me, because I do listen, and I think as far as feedback. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy the the Banny Awards. I want to see the feedback, and I want to hear what are the fans thinking. And one of the things, Bryson, that we have noticed, women's basketball has got a lot of work to do. There is definitely a lot of apathy. I think there's a lot of questions. I think, for better or for worse, obviously, with everybody moving on to Athens, basically.
Most of them, heck, we don't even. I just looked at the roster.
Kyle Nash is not on this episode. He could be at Athens for all we know.
I looked at the roster right now. I know that there's still question marks on Destiny Thomas right now. So, but regardless of what happens with her, right, this is pretty much a complete and total reset. But with that said, I do think that this coaching staff, with the pedigree that they have and the diversity and experience that they have, I am willing to see what they have in store.
Oh, no doubt. They deserve to get the look. But I'm just saying, they're going to have to try to earn the trust of the fan base that maybe feels slighted for whatever the reason. They feel disinterested, slighted, whatever you want to say. I think that is a question, because that happened with Marlin fans. I can tell you that from experience. And that's going to be a challenge going to the Big 12, which is a way much stronger league than the American and women's basketball as well. The good news for Cynthia Messer, in a way, if you're going to start over, maybe this is the time to start over before you go into the league, instead of starting over while you're in the Big 12. That's the good sign there. All right, let's move on, because
they only have one season to do that, though. But
no, but that in basketball, that's okay. That could, with transfer portal and everything, we'll see. So to be determined on that. But there's definitely questions. Let's move to women's soccer, because news came out on late Wednesday, Bryson. We were waiting for this, and now we have the women's soccer schedule. So we now have men's soccer, volleyball, and women's soccer schedule, along with football. So we know the fall sports schedules. And what jumps out to me, and I know you're going to read it real quick, women's soccer by far, of all the sports in the fall, has the strongest schedule. It is incredible, the non-conference schedule that they have built. It will begin August 18th, the first UCF sporting event of the 2022-2023 regular season that will count towards results. I'm not counting exhibitions. Will be women's soccer hosting Florida, and it goes from there, doesn't it, Bryce?
Yes, indeed. So we have, so they travel out to Baton Rouge to play LSU on August 21st. Then they
That's an NCAA tournament team, by the way. LSU beat UCF last year. So I'll just go ahead, continue.
Then they travel out to Orem, Utah to play Utah Valley, which is actually right next door to Provo, where BYU plays, which I'm perhaps a little bit of a preview for when they go to the Big 12 a little bit, because they have to go to that area. Then they come home on August 28th to play Florida Gulf Coast. Then they head up to Jacksonville to play North Florida on September 1st. Then they come home to play Ole Miss on September 4th.
NCAA tournament team that UCF beat, by the way, probably was their best That win on the road at Ole Miss last year and the win against Penn State at home, probably their two best wins of the year last year.
Yeah, indeed. Then they have a week off before they head up to Chapel Hill to play North Carolina. And after what happened in 2021 with that game, I am chomping at the bit to see these two teams go at it.
North Carolina women's soccer speaks for itself. Anson Dorrance and company over there. That speaks for itself.
Then they open up conference play on September 15th, where they travel to Memphis. And then they travel to Austin to take on Texas on September 18th.
Woo. UCF opened the season last year beating Texas, crushing Texas. Texas rebounded, made the tournament. That could be a future Big 12 game a year from now, Bryson. Less than 365 days away from UCF going to the Big 12. This could be a future Big 12 game. This game this year will be in Austin, will likely be televised on the Longhorn Network, but Texas is good.
Yes. And then of course they finish out the year with conference play with Cincy on September 29th at home, going to Philadelphia to play Temple on October 8th, coming home to play SMU on October 9th, then going to Tulsa to play the Golden Hurricane on October 16th. October 20th, they come home to play ECU. 3 days later, October 23rd, they play Houston, and they conclude the season with USF on October 27th in Tampa. I think this is another, not to mention they have exhibition games against FAU and Miami, which is a nice way to prepare yourself for that Florida game, I would say. So I think this is a very good schedule that Coach Sahadak has put together here. Really, I think with this team going to kind of the state of the program is, can this offense and fielding defense improve? Because Caroline Delisle was absolutely peppered with shots last season, and she still managed to be the goalkeeper of the year in the American Athletic Conference, just because she was a big reason why the team stayed in as many games as they did. So I think Coach Sahadak really needs to look at that, not only with the defenders, but also a little bit with the forwards. It's like, hey, we need to give Caroline Delisle some breathing room here, because
get back to what they were a few years back when they were making the tournament. They were a strong defensive team where your goalkeeper wasn't getting a ton of action. To your point, help Caroline around there, and the way you do that is offensively put pressure on the other team instead of, and put some goals on the board, which this team has struggled the last couple of years, Bryson. And I think when you look at the fall this year, the three big questions, I think, for fall sports. One, which is the obvious in football, the quarterback situation, right? So let's put football aside. That's number one. You look at it, can women's soccer get back to the tournament? Isn't it crazy, Bryson? We just had maybe the greatest women's sports year in UCF athletics history, right? And the only two women's sports that did not make postseason, did not make the tournament, rowing, women's soccer. Women's soccer, historically, has as much tradition as any women's sport in UCF to not make the tournament. They were right there. They could have made it. Didn't, kind of faded at the end with the goal, the lack of scoring kind of caught up with them at the end, and they were one of the first 4 or 5 out of the tournament. To me, one of the big questions is, can this program get back to the tournament? They haven't been to the tournament since 2017. I think that will be there. People use pressure in a negative tone. I think there's pressure in the program. They always put pressure, but they want to make the tournament. And I think it's important if they can get to the tournament before going to the Big 12, which again will be a stronger league. I think they can adapt to it, but they just need this momentum to be more on the positive side. It feels like the soccer program, kind of like baseball, Bryson. It seems like something has gone wrong, whether it be an injury or whatever, over the last few years. And we'll see if this is the year for soccer. But that's one of the big storylines in the fall is, can soccer get back to the tournament? We'll see.
Yes, indeed. We'll probably get the chance to talk with Coach Sahadak. We will certainly try to do that at some point, either before the season starts or early on in the year, and we'll be able to ask her about all that. Yeah.
Exciting schedule though. Great schedule.
Yes, the good news is that they have an amazing goaltender that would have been nominated for Female Athlete of the Year had this year not been so stacked with
Correct.
female athletes. So having her back is going to be a major boon. The hope is that it's not all on her.
No.
So,
hopefully they get balanced offense, more attacking. Again, they weren't that far off, but look, the expectations are high in women's soccer historically. So we'll see how that goes. Couple other sports before we go. Men's soccer, because you've been on top of this story for a while. Men's soccer, as now we know, will be playing their final year in the American, but then after that, they're scheduled to be joining the Sun Belt. What's your thoughts on the state of men's soccer at UCF? They've been a couple Sweet 16 years under Scott Calabrese. This is their final year in the American, then they'll go to the Sun Belt. Your thoughts on the state of men's soccer?
I think that men's soccer actually has the opposite problem of women's soccer, and it's that their offense is one of the best in the nation. Seriously, that's one of the reasons I nominated Paul Souders for men's, push for Paul Souders to be nominated for men's assistant coach of the year, because the offense that this team has done is absolutely insane, with Luca Dorado, Gino Vivi, absolutely killing it. And both of them look to be back next year. Gino Vivi was a junior last year, so it's his senior year. So this is a really good time to have that, because that 1-2 punch of Dorado and Vivi are getting on. So you really want to be able to use them while you have them. The problem is in the goalkeeping, because UCF used 3 different goalkeepers last year. And so the question now is, which one is going to take over and start the whole year? Because the year before they had Yannick Girdle. So the question is who is going to take that starting job, and who is the right one to do it? So I think if they solve their issues there at goalie, then I think for the most part they should be so good going into next season. As far as the Sun Belt goes, I'm very excited about the teams that are there. I think that'll certainly be a very powerful men's soccer conference, and so I think that I don't think we need to worry about that. But that's not to say though that we have to rest our laurels here with the American, because we have an influx of new teams coming into the American, which means a different schedule and some new conference opponents in UAB, FIU, FAU, and Charlotte. So it'll be very interesting to see how this with the new schedule and how that goes. But I think that the biggest thing that we need to watch for men's soccer is going to be that defense and goalkeeper spots, because that's where they were snake bit last year. And so they got to make sure that they can't just force Dorado and Vivi to just be scoring every which way.
Well, and especially you mentioned the schedule change this year in the American. They play everybody once. Before they played teams twice. Now you got to play one because it's a bigger league. And you're going to see the same thing in the Sun Belt, which I know you and Jeff believes this will be the strongest league in men's soccer. Who knows? There's still some stories to unpack on the Sun Belt, but that's the storylines in men's soccer and the state of them. And then we'll wrap up with volleyball, because that's going to be, to me, Bryson, I mentioned 3 big storylines in the fall. Football, who's going to be the quarterback? Women's soccer, can they get back to the tournament? And then volleyball, going for a 5th straight American Conference title, trying to end the dynasty run there before going to the Big 12. I think they'll be very competitive in the Big 12. But this is the last year of McKenna Melville and the Knights and Amber Olsen. They were a handful of swings away last year from a Sweet 16. They've never been to the Sweet 16 in the Division I era. We just saw softball get to their first Sweet 16. You and I know volleyball players saw that up close. That's going to inspire them. Can they break through and get to the Sweet 16? McKenna Melville is set up to break the school record in kills, among other categories she's on track to break. Could end up being on the Mount Rushmore of UCF volleyball. But I think the big question that fans have, can this team break through and get to that Sweet 16 round in volleyball, and they try to go a 5th straight conference title this year and carry that momentum to the Big 12, I think is the question for volleyball this fall. It's going to be fascinating to see with them.
You pretty much nailed it right on the head. McKenna and Amber are 2 amazing players for their position, and having one more year of them is certainly going to be paramount to this team's success. I think the big thing here is going to be the filling of the middle blocker spot. Losing Watson and Moravec, is two of the best blockers in UCF history, is definitely going to be, I think, the biggest question that this team has. And the good news is that they still have Claudia Dillon, transfer out of Missouri, who had a very good season herself. And then you have Amari Williams, who's a grad student who's returning from injury, and Abby Hansen, who's coming in from Oregon. So I think that the Daje and his staff have done a solid job filling the holes they have with the biggest hole they have through the portal. And then, of course, they brought up Heidi Bondi. And, of course, they have the two liberos of Caitlin Grimes and Chloe Shear to complement Amber and McKenna. So I think we're in store for another strong season from UCF volleyball. The problem is going to be how far can they go? And this is crunch time to really go to maybe try to go for that Sweet 16 spot because
you got your last year of arguably the greatest player in program history. This is the last year.
Indeed.
And can they put themselves in a position to host like softball did? Tougher to do it could be tough in volleyball. The American not as strong in volleyball. That's one thing volleyball is going to benefit. Stronger league in the Big 12, more room for error and better opportunities to host than you do in the American, which has been at best a two-bid league, and they haven't been a two-bid league since Jordan Thompson graduated from Cincinnati and been part of the U.S. national team. So, but I know you and I are looking forward to seeing a lot of volleyball. I have a feeling both of us will be seeing a lot of volleyball together in person and see a legend in McKenna Melville there. So that's the story for the major sports at UCF. We'll get you set for the fall, which, again, first fall event, regular season game, UCF women's soccer hosting Florida August 18th. Volleyball will start a few weeks after that. Men's soccer, and of course, football will get going. Final season in the American. And then, of course, we're less than 365 days until officially UCF's in the Big 12. And so we kind of wanted to give you an idea of where we think these sports programs stand under those marks. Should be a lot of fun. So that'll do it here for Black Gold Banneret Podcast. Thanks to Andrew Glukoff for joining us. Thanks for Bryson Turner, who had to be the executive producer. He edited this show, so he's fired up for that. Make sure you check us out on blackandgoldbanneret.com. We still have Banny Awards that nominees, articles coming out. We've had a great turnout, as we mentioned earlier. We will have the Banny Awards, we hope, either next week or the following week. Soon we'll have a podcast dedicated to the winners, and me and Bryson will have an after show Bannies, which will give you more details on our YouTube channel, Black and Gold Banneret. There. Make sure you subscribe there because you're going to have more and more content, especially as we get in closer to the football season there. Follow us on all the social media devices. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Give us a 5-star rating and give us some thumbs up there on the YouTube channel there. So
don't forget to subscribe.
Subscribe is always important. We really would appreciate that. That was Bryson Turner you just heard. I'm Eric Lopez. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.